Welcome to Everything Mental Health with your hosts, Stephen Edwards and Maureen Edwards.
Hello again and welcome, Stephen.
Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure. I really took what you said in the last session to heart about the self-regulation for kids and how important it is for parents to be consistent. And I was thinking of myself as a parent and how difficult it always was for me to be consistent. And I was wondering, like, how do parents do that? Like, if they don't have that sort of temperament, or if setting boundaries and being sort of the follow through with children is difficult for them. Like, how do parents maneuver that?
Well, you bring up a very interesting word right there, and it was follow through. And I think it's kind of almost a trap that a lot of parents or caregivers fall into, because their initial reaction to seeing something they don't like is almost always, if you don't stop doing that, I'm going to do this. And that's fine in and of itself, but where a lot of people fail is they'll say that out loud: if you don't stop screaming, I'm going to take your iPad away. And then they just don't seem to either have it in them or don't seem to value the importance of what they're actually saying. Because, say, the child continues doing that behavior and they don't follow through, they don't take the iPad away, they don't take a certain privilege away, they don't show that if you do this, I'm going to do this. If that's proven time and time again that they're not following through, they're teaching the child or whomever that their word almost means nothing. You're showing them that they don't have to respect what you say because you're not showing them that. So I would say, sorry to interrupt, so I would say it's almost better not to get caught in that language if you know that you don't have to follow through. Because there are different ways to kind of maneuver bad behavior. But if you always go right into a punishment and then never actually deliver that punishment, or you only deliver it for a few minutes and then you're like, oh, I think he learned his lesson, I'm going to give this back to him, then you're really just kind of setting yourself up for more negative behavior and more problems down the line.
When you said respect, that really resonated with me, because what comes to my mind in my own parenting experience, if there's not sort of a teaching of what respect is and how to respect someone, the child does not learn how to respect themselves and might have a hard time setting their own boundaries and having a hard time maybe being like walked over by other people, that kind of thing. So I really think that respect thing is a big one.
Yeah, you do see that a lot. And children learn in a lot of different ways. It's not only what you tell them, it's also what you model. And if your life, you're not modeling these positive behaviors, say you're in a relationship where they see that their partner, whether that's their father or mother, isn't respecting, their other significant partner, then you're modeling poor behavior for your child, and they're picking up on that this is acceptable. And not only is this acceptable, but this is what healthy looks like. This is what normal looks like. And so they'll almost seek that kind of reality in the future. And that's really what people struggle with different insecure and avoidant attachment styles, is they've just seen so much negative behavior and they've modeled after it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. So now you're bringing up the question, like if this is like as deep as our attachment styles, and then the parents' attachment styles as well, and then also the parent, if there's a couple, their relationship together, and how that is seen through the child's eyes. So and then what comes up from that, thinking about like the respect thing, but also thinking about the consistency thing. What do you do if both parents are on different realms of consistency? One is consistent, one is not so much. Like, what does that teach the child?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is it teaches them which parent to ask certain questions of, which parent they'll get away with certain behaviors with, which parent they won't. That's the negative aspect, right? So if they, if mom is always, you're really on the ball, and anytime they, quote unquote, screw up, she's right there to hammer a lesson into them, then they'll try to avoid screwing up in front of mom, or at least letting mom see that. Whereas if dad doesn't show any of those negative emotions, even though they're not necessarily negative, the child might just perceive them that way, because a lot of the time you perceive discipline as a negative thing as a child until you kind of grow up and you gain a little bit more perspective. So it kind of teaches the child, okay, so maybe I'll just tell dad, and maybe dad won't tell mom that this happened at school, and I can kind of get away with it. On the flip side, I think down the line, as they get older, they'll kind of relax, guys, relax.
Your animal people. They're right there.
They're right there, always. But down the line, they might look at the parent that wasn't disciplining them as someone who made a lot of mistakes, and they'll have perhaps more respect for the one that was. So they might in turn go towards that parent for more of the problems, or more of their when in times of need, because they've shown that consistency growing up. So it kind of almost flips as they grow older, where they realize that one parent kind of dropped the ball in a lot of ways. They kind of lose a bit of a relationship with that one, and kind of gain one with that who's doing the opposite.
Right. And are you seeing this in the kids that you work with, like that flip-flop in their, from maybe like, a 6-7-year-old kid to one that's 14, 15?
It's hard to say in my experience directly, because I don't necessarily see the dynamics at home. But I can look at two separate individuals, and you can kind of make correlations. So, if I'm seeing a young child avoiding one parent because they don't want a reaction from that parent, I could see a totally different, young adult who has suffered many family breakdowns, who may talk to me about how they respect one parent because they did so much of these kind of disciplinary actions, whereas the other one was and because of that, they almost blame that parent for how they turn out, because they didn't have that structure and consistency growing up, and now they're kind of unraveling, and they're seeing that in themselves.
So how does a parent who has trouble making follow through with their child, how do they go about that?
It kind of depends on the child. I mean, some children are a little bit more well behaved. Less discipline is necessary because they can naturally self-regulate their emotions for the most part, their temperament and behavior. So you kind of run into a lot less problems growing up. So with that kind of child, you might be able to just have a conversation with them and point out to them point blank that I'm not good at these things. I'm not going to be able to discipline you. And then maybe you can have a conversation about like, what you expect from them and what you'll feel like when they do certain things, because maybe they don't need discipline per se. Maybe they need a parent to almost guilt trip them into avoiding certain behavior. Because if that child has a lot of empathy and a lot of care for their parents, and you're able to express how their actions are making you feel, then that could in itself be enough to deter them from doing something.
Right.
Whereas another child, they might see that as an opening to, abuse them to a certain extent and abuse their behavior because they know they're not going to see any discipline.
Now you're talking about discipline, I'm thinking, how do parents like effectively discipline their children? Like where's the book on that? Or is every child different? Like, what do you think? It's a big question.
Every child is absolutely different, but I think that most tools overlap, so you're able to use a lot of different strategies with a lot of the same strategies with a lot of different children, and that'll work just fine. As for the book on it, there's a lot of trial and error involved. Every parent's going to make lots of mistakes. That's kind of a given. But when you just need to be very self-aware of how your behavior is impacting them based on what you're seeing from them. Because you should, as a parent, know your child's baseline on a given day, what their mood is, what they're going to do, what they might not do, what they're more likely to do. And that kind of shifts as they grow older and hit puberty and start to develop. But you should have a general idea of kind of who they are. And then you need to look at yourself and think, okay, in this interaction we had, how did I react, or how did I interact with them? And what did I see? Did they withdraw? Did they get defensive? Did they lash out at me? Did they agree with me? You can kind of see what their body language is saying, what they're verbally saying, and then are their actions in line with what you're seeing?
I think that's a really good point, because I know myself, and I've worked with a lot of parents who continue to use the same parenting style or the same parenting tactics all the time for every situation, rain or shine. And there's no sort of observation in how that is like working with the child. It's like, it's got to be my way, and if it doesn't work that way, there's a problem, but the problem's not with me, the problem's with the child.
Yeah, you definitely see that a lot. It's very black and white mentality, and a lot of blame that never seems to go on that individual. It always seems to go on someone else, and that's usually that kind of pattern of behavior you usually see in many aspects of their life, right? It's not normally just the parent blaming the child for everything. The parent's probably blaming everyone else for everything as well, right? They're not only singling the child out. More often than not, that's a pattern in their own life that they're just following through with their child as well.
What do you think of the concept of a time out versus a time in?
Can you explain what you mean by a time in?
So I remember years ago I did a parenting course on time outs, and they were where you would give your child little rewards for the behavior that you wanted, and if they didn't do what was agreed upon between the parent and the child, they would take a time out. It could be 5 minutes in the room, it could be taking something away from them, it could be something like that. Whereas a time in is where you emotionally connect with the child. It works really well with little children, maybe under the age of 5, where the child is displaying a temper tantrum or some challenging behavior in some way. And instead of alienating the child and having them take a time out, you bring the child into them and you ask them what's wrong. And usually there is an emotional kind of expression. In other words, I'm upset, Billy took my ball. And then they cry, and then you can hug them and show them emotional support. And they're able to sort of offload their emotional content in a safe place. And this is obviously the parent is learning how to do this as well. And that in itself helps regulate the child's behavior. And I wanted to know what you thought about that.
I think that's an interesting method. I don't think either of them should be used exclusively. I think there's a time and a place for both. And I think a good place to start would be with the time in concept. Because before you discipline, I'm a firm believer that you need to understand the whole situation. Excuse me for 1 second. You need to understand the whole situation, and part of that entails talking to the child, and if there's multiple parties involved, bringing everyone together and kind of doing what would essentially be a restorative circle, where everyone kind of explains their own point of view of what happened in the situation, and then you as the parent or the mediator, the adult with knowledge in the situation and as unbiased because you weren't a part of this, you can kind of take what's being said and you can come to an agreement between everyone involved where everyone feels heard, because that's very important, and you know exactly what the situation is. Because you see a lot of the time, people are very quick to yell, they're very quick to discipline when they see something that they perceive as wrong, which isn't inherently terrible, but it kind of makes you start disciplining from a point of ignorance, because you don't exactly know what the whole situation was. Maybe you saw Billy take, Simon's ball, so you're like, wow, Billy, how dare you take Simon's ball? But you didn't realize that a minute earlier, Simon took it from Billy already, and Billy was the first one playing with it. So you got to bring everyone into the situation. And if it's just you and the child, you just have to have a conversation of what exactly happened. Why are you feeling this way? And then you have to make the opinion of, are you feeling something that is it justified? Is the behavior you're expressing because of this feeling justified or not? And if it is, then you could say, you know what? I was wrong. My mistake. Here's this person. Here's the ball back that, was taken from you initially. My mistake for yelling at you. When I worked in the classroom, that happened plenty of times where I would see something that I thought, oh my goodness, this guy just did a terrible behavior. That's not good. I reserved judgment, brought everyone together, figured out the whole story, and then made a informed decision on where to go from there. So bringing that back to the whole time in concept, you definitely need to start with that. You need to figure out what the situation is. And then once you figure that out, then you need to think, okay, I understand what you're feeling. I can sympathize with that, but maybe that's just not something that's realistic right now. I see it all the time with children. They don't want to wear a coat outside and it's winter out, or they don't want to wear their gloves and they start throwing a temper tantrum, or maybe they don't want to do, whatever it is. Maybe we'll stick with that example for now. But the reality is, I'm going to do what's necessary anyway. But this is just the reality. You need to wear your gloves. We need to leave the store. I can't afford to buy you this toy. Treat them, almost equally, because that's the only way to really gain respect, when you treat someone as an equal, even though in this situation you have all the power. you got to make them feel like they have some power and control too, because this is their life and they want some autonomy as well, and they want to be heard. So you need to kind of use a combination of each tool.
I like that, what you just said about the adult might be the one with all the power, but it's important for the child to feel like they have the power. It reminds me of when I think I was 6 years old, and I was doing a judo course, and one of the instructors was an older gentleman, and when I was allowed to win, in my mind as a 6-year-old, I didn't realize that. I thought, wow, I really won. I did this move on this instructor. I must be really good, and that was what he did. Was he instilled confidence, and he instilled this kind of motivational drive for me to do my best, keep doing better, and enjoy what I'm doing as well. So it was really an effective move on his part.
He empowered you.
He empowered me. Yes, totally.
Yeah, it's really important that we empower our youth and give them the tools they need to advocate for themselves. Because a lot of children, they grow up in a household, in a world where, they have so little control, so little power, no decision making. Everything in their life is just basically what someone else says they're doing at any given time. And unless you instill those little moments of like making them feel accomplished, even if it's from a point of place where it's completely false, right? You didn't actually do this move on him and knock him down, but that's kind of besides the point, because you learned a lesson from that had he just knocked you to the ground, you would have been taught maybe a completely different lesson, one that didn't give you any power, one where you're like, wow, I kind of suck at this and maybe I don't want to do this anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, and it was multiple lessons. It was many different things, all in that one strategy that this older instructor used on the 6-year-old.
One of the children in my class likes to arm wrestle me, and it's always quite a battle who's going to win. But without doubt, she always seems to take me down. And it makes her feel great about herself, and she feels confident, she feels proud, and she's a little reserved. She has a developmental disability. She's shy. She needs all the empowerment she can get.
That's lovely. I'm wondering, maybe we can just sort of talk a little bit about empowerment, because my God, that's a huge topic. And I'm thinking, maybe empowerment is one of these things that's like really underrated, and it's so important for kids to feel like they're empowered, even if they understand that they're a kid and that the adults might be in charge and that kind of thing, but to feel empowered, just like you were talking about that little girl. How important do you think that is?
I think it's critical to their development, and I would really take it back to using a strength-based approach when you're interacting with people. And what that means is that everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes they're more pronounced, sometimes they're a little more hidden. But, from baseline, you're better at some things than you are at others. And from a strength-based approach, what you want to do is you want to kind of hone in on those things that they're already good at or that they, enjoy. And
That's okay. okay. We don't mind Monty. He's playing with his toy.
Yeah, he's having a grand time. So a strength-based approach, you really want to take the things that they're already good at, and you want to boost their self-esteem by honing in on those things and giving them the opportunity to develop those skills and really making sure they feel good about themselves while they're doing those things. And that really helps with their self-esteem and their desire to do better, and helps with their motivation. And self-esteem is such a important part of our being, because if you don't have self-esteem, then you're just so much less likely to strive for anything in your life, because you don't believe you can attain anything. So when you utilize a strength-based approach properly, you kind of teach the lesson, an intrinsic lesson that lets them know that they are capable of doing certain things and they can achieve what they really strive to do. And once you do that, you really help with their confidence and their ability to go out into the world and succeed and work towards goals and achieve them without giving up halfway along the way, because they've already been succeeding at things from such a young age.
So it's better to start young.
Always. But just because you don't start young doesn't mean you can't get there. It might be a bumpier road. It might be, a longer process. But we can always rewire our brains.
What do you think about that the opposite? Like you want a kid to be self-confident and have a good sense of self or self-esteem, and what you're talking about, like modeling this and putting opportunities to empower the child. But what about like that opposite, where the child starts to have a very unrealistic view of themselves, maybe like as a budding narcissism, or where they think they're better than other people, or even bullying? Like, is that still sort of the same concept, or what's going on, and can you see that starting with a child?
Could you expand on that a little bit more?
Well, if the child is, say, starting to bully,
sure,
and picking on other kids, or basically using sort of power in an abusive way,
yeah,
power over other children, and at the same time there's this kind of air of self-importance, or kind of and I'm not saying narcissistic personality disorder, I'm not saying that, I'm just saying the traits of narcissism, where they sort of take this I'm better than other kids.
I would even argue that it's the opposite, where they're taking someone else's power in order to give themselves power because they feel as if they have none. And I think a lot of the time with bullying in particular, it's not the person that's super popular and super confident and doing super well in school and has great relationships at home and lots of friends. It's usually not that person that starts bullying. It's usually someone who has more risk factors in their life. Maybe they're not very popular. Maybe they think they're, unattractive. Maybe they're emotionally abused at home or physically abused at home or at school. And then they kind of use bullying as a means to get some of control back in their own life by putting someone else down. That makes them feel better because everyone is always putting them down. So they've we talked about modeled behavior earlier. They've modeled that that's almost how healthy looks like, putting someone down. I mean, that's not always the case, of course, but I think in a lot of times you see that with bullying.
So it's kind of the same thing. It's that low self-esteem where they're just using power in a different way. They're using other people or picking on other people to feel more empowered themselves. But it's
Absolutely.
a phenomenon. Thanks, Stephen.